Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second meeting here. You've got an agenda in front of you, and you've also got a summary of guiding principles from last time. So that was a draft of a summarization of what we talked about with guiding principles, and I would say that we'll talk about that later on, but that is very much not a permanent thing. That's something for us to have during discussion of guiding principles, which we hope to end the meeting with, have a little bit more discussion, pretty much like we did last time. So I wanted to get started with some discussion of subcommittees. So if you remember, we broke subcommittees down into 4 general areas based more or less off the cultural landscape report with some additions, modifications, changes. The first group being river. And so what we did is everybody submitted their names according to those 4 areas, your first and second choices, and also whether you were interested in acting as a diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate for any of those groups. So we went back, we compiled all of that, and I am very glad to say that for the most part, there are, I think, 2 exceptions. We were able to give everybody their primary choices. We did have a couple instances where we needed to slot some folks into some places to be sure that we had a good critical mass in each group. So I just wanted to run through those real quick. I think you've also probably seen this via email, but please let us know if you have any questions or comments on these. So River, Thomas Evans, Sarah Beasley, Parker Dixon, and Randy Pressig. The Architecture and Archaeology group, Mary Jane Verrett, Ramon Vasquez, Vince Michael, and Irby Hightower. Morning, Irby. The land group, which encompasses ecology basically outside the river, so plants and animals and ecological systems. Freight Seligson, Joe Bravo, Sarah Beasley, and Carrie Kimball. And you've probably noticed, but the stars are folks who expressed that interest in DEI advocacy. And the last group, Circulation and Connections, Alex Gonzalez, Kathy Amen, and Allison Cohen. Sarah Beasley expressed an interest to be in 2 subcommittees, and so we've got her assigned to both subcommittees. If anyone else is interested in being in multiple subcommittees, now would be a good time to express that interest. Because the next item on the agenda, unless anybody has any comments or questions about those, next item is to establish subcommittee meetings, which we hope to get going within 2 weeks or so. So just kind of a reminder, what we talked about with methodology. The big picture of what we're doing here is generating a system by which projects can be evaluated in the park, specifically for funding by the city and for the TERS, but also in a general sense. So that includes a lot of input from the subcommittee specifically on what criteria that you see are the most important within that area. And then we'll build a structure around that to evaluate projects, in addition to getting a lot of public input on those. So for this first set of subcommittee meetings, that's going to be the real core of generating what those criteria will be, how we'll evaluate projects, what's important within, for example, the Circulation and Connections group, not what you would like to see as a project, but what you think projects should accomplish. So our hope is that we can have these first meetings within 2 weeks or so. And what we've talked about a little bit is doing them kind of 2 by 2. So we'll have one location, wherever that ends up being. We've got several different options. We'll have 2 committees meet at the same time, and then we'll have the next 2 committees meet after that to give a little bit of flexibility in case people want to join multiple subcommittees. That breaks it up a little bit better. I guess my first question would be, we've met on Tuesdays. Is Tuesdays a good day to do that generally for people? Looks like a yes, yeah. Okay, I'm going to assume that this time also works pretty well, since it's working for you now? Okay. All right, I think that gives us enough to kind of get going on scheduling those. We'll follow up with emails. We've also talked about options for doing Zoom meetings. I think it's probably worthwhile having this first meeting in person because of the nature of the meeting, and also so that you get actual face-to-face time talking to one another and facilitated by us. But after that, I think Zoom is a very good option because it expedites so many things, makes it much easier. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay, so first two items on the agenda accomplished. We are very pleased to have the City of San Antonio Office of, I'm going to forget the order, but Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility, thank you, with us to lead a DEI presentation and hopefully a little bit of discussion after that. It seemed like this was a particularly worthwhile thing to do as we get started. So I'll hand it off. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kim McCleary. I'm an equity manager with the Department of Diversity. I also kind of go a little bit off with it, but diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility with City of San Antonio. So thank you very much for letting us be here today. First of all, I want to say thank you for your participation in anything outside of work. I know that it's a lot of time that you spend doing this, so it is an honor to be able to speak to you today. I'm an equity manager and a former educator, and so I've been with the city for 1 year, and it's just a beautiful place to work, so thank you again. Again, I'm Kim McCleary, and so today we're going to go over a couple of things in terms of terminology and maybe start some discussions about the guiding principles that you were talking about, I think, in the last meeting to guide the work that you're doing with this committee. So today we're looking at key equity concepts and common vocabulary. We're also going to look at what is the distinction between equality and equity, and then what are some of our, oh, I think it's running on a loop. So a lot of words up here with the key concepts, and usually we don't like to be very wordy on our slides, but the visual there that was on the right, if we think of diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of a party, diversity is the faces in the room, okay? And so when we think about diversity, we're thinking about who's in the room, who's participating, right? And so obviously diversity means that we have different faces in the room. We have men, women, we have different ethnicities, we have different abilities, different, just differences, right? So diversity is who's in the room. Inclusion means that the people in the room are able to participate. They're able to feel welcome. They feel belonging. They feel a sense of community. And so the idea of inclusivity is who has, how do we feel? Are we able to participate? Equity means that everybody in that room has a voice, has an ability to talk about the things that are needed or things that they experience. So diversity, equity, inclusion has those different features in it. And so part of what today's training is about just that vocabulary. Accessibility, when we talk about that, we're looking at a couple of things. We're looking at language access as well as access for disabilities. And so language access, I think in the last meeting it was talked about like translation. We're also looking at possibly doing Braille translations and things like that as well whenever we're, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. And so, any questions? Just kidding. And that's it. Okay, here's my wordy, don't do this as a teacher, key concepts, right? There will be a quiz at the end of the presentation. I'm just kidding. So on the left there, you see a little bit about what we were talking about earlier with the inclusion and diversity and equity, okay? Some of the key concepts, though, equality. There is a difference between equality and equity, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So equality is the state of being equal. Everybody gets the same thing. There's no distinction, no differences. Equity means that people get what they need. Access is, again, like I was talking about, accessibility language, accessibility to an experience if somebody is in a wheelchair. Even something as simple as just went to the zoo this weekend with my grandson, and my daughter needed to change him, and there wasn't any of the changing areas in some of the bathrooms, and so her access was a little bit limited. So it's things like that that we also consider. Inclusion, like I said, is a state of being included. So the people in the room may look different, but do they feel included? Okay. Diversity, the different ways that people are. How do we differ? We differ in many ways, and so that's a good thing. And then we have the linguistically diverse, are people whose language maybe is different than ours, and so we're looking at it from a positive standpoint when we say somebody is linguistically diverse, as to say they have the ability to speak other languages versus a negative where we say, oh, they're limited English proficient, which is something as an educator we used quite a bit. Oh. Sorry. So this is a great example of the differences between equality and equity. And so if you look there on the left, equality, it's a curb, right? And so it's the same curb. You have people with differing abilities. You've got that diverse group there. And if you look there on the left, you notice that somebody in a wheelchair is going to have difficulty moving from place to place there. You also might have somebody who, like my mother, can't hear. And so traffic is coming. If there is something happening there, she's not able to hear. You might have somebody who's visually impaired as well. And so in that first example, everything is the same for everybody. In the second example, we have some modifications so that people have access and so that they can participate and be included in the walk. And so you've got a curb cut instead. You have the, now they have those where when you press the sign to go across the street, it'll tell you traffic, and so there's a verbal, auditory. And so equity means that we're giving people what they need. Okay, so that's the difference between equality and equity. What our office does is we work a lot with talking about the history of equality and the history of equity and how that has shifted over the years, where obviously if there was equality in the beginning of our history, we would have a little bit, it would look a little different, right? And so when we focus on equity as a group here, as your guiding principle, I think if you want to reference that second picture and just again thinking of who's in the room, who's able to participate, are the people participating, do they have their voices heard, and is it accessible? And so equity means just and fair opportunities for everybody, okay? So it's opportunity, we've got opportunities, and we also have outcomes with equity. Fair opportunities and outcomes. So there's two differences between the opportunity. An opportunity is something that is offered, right? People can choose to take it or they can choose not to, but it's offered. And so there's that opportunity. So do people have opportunities to enjoy services of the city? Is that an opportunity that everybody has? And so that's one of the differences between an outcome. So an outcome is what is the result of somebody either taking that opportunity, taking advantage of it, or not. So your outcome is going to possibly be different. So we've got opportunities and outcomes. And so equity does account for the different histories, the different cultures, challenges, and needs of people. And so this is for city, right, as far as the serving in our policy making. But equity is achieved when one's identity cannot determine their outcomes. And so if a child is born in one area of the city versus another, equity means that wherever they're born does not determine their life's outcome. And equity, we like to say, is data-driven. And so data, when you collect data and you're looking at the impacts of decisions, the impacts of again, those opportunities that are offered, you look at that and then you address maybe if you see in that data that maybe there's a group that is not able to participate, you can come back and look at how to refine whatever service that you're doing, that you offer, so that accessibility is open to more people. Proactive and people-centered. And so the fact that right now we're talking about it, it's proactive. This group is being very proactive about knowing that that's something to look at. And people-centered is, obviously, we want people to be able to participate in opportunities, so. And I'm gonna touch on bias just briefly right now. So biases, we have a couple of biases, two different types of bias, and then we have like bigger biases. So an explicit bias is something that is expressed directly. So it's a preference for or against a person or a group. So explicit means it's expressed directly. You can't not see that that's a bias. Something implicit is something that is subconscious, okay? We have explicit and implicit. We have institutional, and we have individual. So the individual is just one person, but an institutional is a group of people who make decisions. And so if there are implicit bias within that group of people, that is one thing we do focus on at the city. We're looking at our implicit institutional bias. And so again, we're looking at outcomes. And so with bias, we just want to make sure that if, when you're considering programs, you're considering services, that we make sure that if there is a bias there, that it's something that we talk about, okay? And again, we focus on outcomes. So whether bias as an institution is explicit or implicit, it doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome. So again, you've got the opportunity that's offered, and then what is the outcome for people? And then the last slide was just mentioning a few things that I know that the advisory committee has already looked at in terms of the guiding principles. There was a focus on culture in your work, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people in here that have a lot of knowledge and a lot of history behind things. So just considering culture in your decisions is very important, considering how things might impact or the messages that are sent in terms of that. We also want to consider in decision making who might benefit and who might be burdened by that decision. So benefits and burdens. And again, it's to consider. So some decisions, everyone might benefit, and there might be some decisions that might burden a group of people or people more than others. And so consider that, please. Access, language and disability access. An example of that might be Braille signage, okay? So Braille signage is important to consider. It provides access to people. I know the city had, I don't know if you've noticed on trash cans, there's now Braille on trash cans to help people be able to access which one is recycle, which one is trash. And so just considering access is important. And also the diversity, who's in the room, right? Who's participating in the programs? Who is there? Who is taking advantage of those opportunities? And so I know that a lot of these have already been considered by your group, and so it's just, again, a reminder of what to consider. And so again, we want to focus on outcomes, and we want to focus on participation with equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Who's in the room? Who's able to participate? Are the people participating able to have access to the services? And are they having a positive outcome from that experience? Residents' participation, obviously we want to have a great quality of life here in the city of San Antonio. We are a destination for many people, and we do offer so many wonderful things, so many beautiful things. And so we want to encourage that participation from people so that our city thrives and that we all are moving towards something really, really wonderful. So that was a very quick presentation. Are there any questions right now at all? On vocabulary, on commonalities? Yes, sir. Hi, Joe.
Did you have an opportunity to read our guiding principles?
I did briefly.
Okay, and did they include enough of the verbiage that you would use normally?
I can go back and look at it, and I'll let you.
That'd be good.
Okay, so the question was just that the guiding principles, if we could look at them and see how if they include this, I will look at that, and I'll be here to go ahead and provide any kind of feedback. But I did briefly look at it, and yes, and I, in preparation for today, I did watch or view the last meeting, and I know that the conversation was very robust and really inclusive of a lot of things that I talked about today. So, are there any other questions? Awesome.
Yeah, thank you. If we signed up to be the DEI person in our subgroups, what are we looking for, or how do we impact the group by raising our hand or saying we need to consider these things? What is our role?
I'd be particularly interested in your thoughts on the rough answer I'm about to give. So our concern when structuring the subcommittees was that if we didn't do something explicit to call out the importance and significance of DEI, it would be lost. So obviously we're capturing some of that now through the guiding principles. But our expectation is that as we talk through the issues with relation to each one of those 4 areas, there are likely to be a lot more considerations that aren't captured by something that's kind of overarching. So our hope is basically that if you've signed up to be an advocate for DEI principles, you are holding yourself to a very high standard in terms of how you think about DEI issues and inclusion and equity as part of that discussion. So I don't think it would necessarily translate to a case where you raise your hand and say, hey, this is how you see this through that lens. It's just a matter of being thoughtful about it and bringing something up, hopefully with relation to the issues that we've talked about here, that's an additional facet of another issue, or that is a specific issue of DEI with regards to the system, like circulation is a great example. You know, that's an obvious situation where there are significant DEI concerns for park users. So I don't know, that's kind of it's a very fluid and not very well-defined answer. And I hope you can refine it a little bit, but that was our thought about having specific representatives.
I would suggest looking at things from a benefit burden, right? And so if you're the DEI champion, maybe just being very mindful about who are benefiting from something and who might be burdened, and then also that opportunity and outcome. And so that might be anybody can consider that, but the champion of the subcommittee might be very explicit in that. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I'm Claudia Guerra. I'm the Assistant Director for the DEI office. I'm still struggling with that. I'm brand new to the department. But what I also wanted to say, please look at us as as a resource. So we are here for you to help your champions, to help your subcommittees and the larger group. We obviously partner with the Office of Historic Preservation, which I just left, so I look longingly over at my colleagues. But also with the Parks Department and many other groups that affect the Brackenridge Park. So we have done analyses. We have experts on disability, on language access, all of which are at your service as a resource if you need any technical discussion. So we can be here for you.
And I can add, so the DEIA office it's been a bit reconfigured, and so encompassed within our department. I'm new to the city, so it's Office of Equity, which there are 4 equity managers, and we are available. We're really an internal department, but we are available for any kind of, if you have questions. We also have the Language Access, Office of Language Access, and that team works internally as well, but they have a lot of great knowledge about services, interpreter services, things like that. Disability Access is another great resource. That team is phenomenal, and they have a lot of great information as well. So our Office of Equity is available for help. If you have questions, if there's anything that you would like for us to look at, please let us know. And again, in that whole umbrella of DEIA, the A was added for accessibility, and so that's where our Disability Access Office came into that. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank you again. As a visitor to many of our beautiful areas, I really do want to say thank you for being here, and thank you for considering something that can be an unfamiliar, territory, I think, sometimes when we think about words, right? And so thank you for considering, again, who's in the room, how are they able to be included in the room, what kind of voice do they have, and are things available and accessible to them for that opportunity that you're offering. And hopefully their outcomes from that are going to be positive. So thank you for the work that you do, and I'll be here. And like I said, Office of Equity is here to support. So thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Allison Chambers, for those who don't remember. I am a principal at Ford Powell & Carson Architects, and I'm happy to see everyone again this morning. Thank you for coming back out. The thing I'm going to talk about is kind of an update on where we are with consolidating all of the projects from the 3 reports. So if you'll remember, we're working with the Brackenridge Park Cultural Landscapes Report, the SHMRO, the TERS plan, and the Brackenridge Park Master Plan. So one of our task 2, or maybe it's task 1, and what we've all been discussing so far is task 2, but task 1 is to go through these, cull all of the projects that are recommended in all 3 reports and consolidate them, find out where there are commonalities, find out if there are conflicts. So we've been working in the background doing that. We have a very extensive spreadsheet of all of the projects, referencing what report they came from, where they have commonalities, things like that. But we wanted to report today not on the specific projects, but on the commonalities and kind of themes, shall we say, that we found among all of the projects and all the reports. So I'm just going to read. It's a lot of words. Tried to include some photos for entertainment value. But this is kind of our consolidation of themes, so it got a little wordy, but bear with me, it's worth it. So first slide, and they're not like grouped, I mean they're sort of grouped, but not really, they're themes, so just bear with me. So first we would like to stabilize and restore the San Antonio riverbanks by establishing a riparian buffer along the San Antonio River. Makes sense? Establish protective buffers of vegetation along the length of the river and reconstruct ecosystem integrity and overall plant and animal diversity. So we included a picture of the cats, but not because we want to continue that animal diversity necessarily, but because they are one of the symptoms of degradation of the park. So they're cute, but they're a problem. And also we want to establish the park as a National Historic Landmark and become the first National Heritage Area in Texas. And I say we want to do these things. I mean, this is what the reports suggest. So I'm not recommending any of these things. This is just the initial overview. You got me. Okay, good. Stick with me. So this is more buildings and physical things. So restore historic buildings, including historic restrooms, and perform a thorough historic structures report. It's kind of documenting, cataloging. Restore and interpret Spanish colonial dams, acequias, and waterworks. Interpret archaeological discoveries of historic hydrological structures and create activities for educating and informing the public on archaeology, and create an accessible digital repository of historic maps, photographs, postcards, news articles, reports, and plans associated with the park. Enhance event spaces for regional use and balance active, passive, and cultural uses of the park. Create additional activities for daily use and include park uses needed by the surrounding neighborhoods. Limit the new buildings in the park. The master plan calls for only a handful of new facilities, and the majority of which are replacements for existing buildings. Incorporate cultural institutions more closely into the park. Increase visibility and pedestrian access to and within the park by improving edges and entrances, creating additional paths, and building new pedestrian bridges. Develop a more concentrated parking scheme by replacing many parking lots or roadside parking with few large parking garages. Incorporate low-impact development features into the park. This one came up over and over and over. Go back one before we get into this. So is there any questions about these themes? Right now, I mean, we're just really, trying to stay high level until we get the methodology established, so then we can get more into the nitty-gritty of specific projects and start distilling them down through the methodology. So hopefully this is just an introduction of what's to come, but I'm here to entertain questions if you have any. Yes?
What happens
if the themes are in conflict with each other? What happens? Well, I think that's something that we would work through. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. A couple slides back, you referenced archaeology.
Yep.
Is that the only place? Well, probably not, but I just want to ask the question. Is that the only place? That's the only place that I saw where there was going to be an intentional interpretation of archaeology around the hydraulical structures?
So archaeology is park-wide, I would say. This is just a distillation, so it may be a little bit too specific, but
Yeah, I think that's what threw me off, that it was really specific.
Yeah.
Right, because there's archaeology throughout the entire park.
Uh-huh. Yes,
So-
it does say that, but you're correct. It is park-wide. It's a very difficult job to take I don't know how many projects we have on the list, but it's a lot, and try to get them into a digestible format for you all so that we can have a discussion. But good point, I appreciate it.
And just for historical purposes, the parking garage and reducing parking lots was floated a few years ago, and there was a lot of blowback.
Right.
I just want to make sure y'all know that, you know, that's something that would have to be really considered.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, this is just what's coming from the reports. Once we distill them into the committees, you know, some may come, some may stay, some go away. Jay's saying stop talking.
No, Jay's saying that's great. And in fact, that is exactly the kind of thing that the subcommittees need to produce. You understand the blowback, you know where it came from, so that is exactly a criteria that you need to bring forward and say, okay, now when you evaluate these projects that are coming out of the master plan and the cultural landscape report and others, this is the lens that should be viewed through. So that is great. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say this is straight from the reports. We obviously have had a lot of history since 2017 when the master plan was done. That has evolved and things that have happened in the neighborhood. So all of that is great knowledge that we're working through with this process. So thank you. Anything else? Anyone else? That's fine. No? Behind you.
Yeah, it seemed to me that that's kind of an example of where things, I mean, it's a park. You want to preserve nature and you want to preserve recreation, and at some point those two things will come into conflict. And I think the same is true of, you know, for example, the parking thing, because you also want to promote event spaces. There are certain events where the distributed parking you have now would actually be better.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else? Okay. So next we're going to talk a little bit more about the guiding principles. And this slide is just a summary. We tried to make short bulleted sentences of what is more lengthy and in front of you, just for reference.
Yeah, so the thought here, and this will carry us through the rest of our time, we've actually been very efficient again, which is sort of terrifying. But the thought here was that this was really the substance of our conversation at our meeting last month. And so what we wanted to do, and you've got, as Allison mentioned, an extended version of this or on the sheets there, your guiding principle sheets there. This is a recapitulation to make sure that we heard, that we were accurate in understanding what people had said. And we also left that discussion very explicitly saying that it's not done. So here's the opportunity to continue that conversation and expand on things that we said. So I would just kind of open things up to comment at this point. Is anything on here? Oh, thanks. Oh, Celine's going to catch you. He must have
So
just stepped
Ramon
out.
left it exactly the. Okay, well I'll just channel him for a minute. So the language here is I'd like to just suggest that we use either Aboriginal people or Indigenous people, and also put them first instead of in the context of history. Put the Aboriginal people first, and then after that came the colonial history. So I mean, it's an important language shift.
Let me grab my
There
sheet
is,
here.
you know, there you go, Ramon. I just was saying that to use either Aboriginal or Indigenous first, and then the colonial history after that. To use the language instead of prehistory, which is kind of a, you know, Eurocentric construct, is to use Aboriginal people who lived here for, we think, 12,000 years, and then after that, history. Yeah, it's in the guiding principles. Okay.
Hold on just a second, just got a mic for you.
So I agree with Maurice. If you read the longer text, it says projects should take the entire history and prehistory of the areas in which is now Brackenridge Park into consideration, including prehistoric use, Spanish colonial development, and land uses precedents to establishment of the park. So where it says prehistoric use is where you would suggest that we add Aboriginal or there.
We use Aboriginal.
So would it be prehistoric and Aboriginal use, or I'm looking on the longer one. So how we, yeah, these are kind of bullet points.
Yeah, we'll work through that. Excellent.
Sorry, I thought I'd add a little DEIA context to that. So the idea of saying prehistory implies that there wasn't history prior to European colonization, which isn't true, right? So that's why some of us in the cultural resources area have stopped using the word prehistory in general. I think that's what Maurice is recommending.
Yeah, I think we're all on board with that, and thank you for that in the conversation. All right.
Given our introduction to DEI, thank you, Kim, for that. I think the first one, even the longer version, is not including equity or all the other terms. So it's saying inclusivity, which I don't know, you'll have to weigh in and see if is that a term that covers everything? Because before I call you, I'm going to read this when I'm in the subcommittee meeting, and it might be helpful to have it more spelled out.
Yeah, I guess.
So we were thinking that a lot of here at the end of the statement here that should not privilege users, that encompasses the idea of diversity, inclusivity. And so I think that this is a very solid statement. Correct.
Just a clarification on the first one, it does go into detail to name class, race, cultural tradition, all of the things that would typically be looked at through a DEIA lens.
Okay. Thank you. More comments, questions? So we're stepping back a little bit. So if these are the overarching principles, do they really include everything that we need to be thinking about? Is there something that isn't here? That's always the hard part, is looking at a list of things and seeing what isn't there.
It's okay. This may not be the right place, but one of our bold goals when we redo this building over here is to do a net zero. And so should we have something about any kind of renovation or future building to have a goal of being net zero or something like that? Or whatever architectural terms you would have.
Right.
Okay.
So I would, two thoughts about that. One is that we do have a subcommittee for which I think that probably has a set of explicit and extended goals, but also I think that gets to a larger point of, kind of climate equity, for lack of a better phrase, which does seem like an overarching thought. Sarah, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to call out the climate equity and sustainability, because there's also the water absorbent sidewalks and heat absorbing sidewalks. So just calling out kind of more of those specific things, in whether it's sustainability or climate equity.
I had asked Corey to, just like DEI came today, that the stormwater group comes so that we have kind of a baseline of what that means, runoff and impervious cover and recharge zones, all of those things that we have a working knowledge or familiarity with it when we're thinking about these things.
Great. Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed the first part. You said you had mentioned to Corey that it'd be great to have a briefing.
The stormwater group that works in runoff and all of those things. Yeah. I'm not sure if you're going to do it, Corey, but I suggested it.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Guys, we can't end this meeting half an hour early. We're going to break into subcommittees unless people have things to say. It's 10 till 10. We can't possibly have gotten this whole sheet that close on the first attempt. There's just no way. Take it and run? Yeah. Okay? Nothing? Nobody? Let's talk then a little bit about the subcommittee meetings, because the process, the intended process for those subcommittee meetings is very similar to what we did with this. So our job as the consultant team and with the city is to help structure and facilitate, to provide a space for y'all to come up with, what relates to the river, what is important about the river, and then hear that, take that in, summarize it, and build off that information into a form that we can then use for the project prioritization methodology. There's another piece here, and maybe this is worth a little discussion, and I'm going to maybe make Anna Maria nervous. There's also a public engagement function to that. So what we talked about before, and I think we're still on track for that, is that the subcommittees are producing that raw material, which we then work through like this. So we have the expectation that we'll have a sheet like this that every subcommittee will produce, maybe shorter, maybe longer, that we will then use as the fuel for a public meeting so that we can get input from hopefully a very broad and diverse cross-section of the folks who care about and use the park. Get their feelings on those things, as well as thoughts about things that are important for the evaluation of projects that we haven't thought about at all. So any questions or concerns about that whole kind of stepped through process? Does the work of the subcommittee make sense in those terms?
You may have done this at the last meeting. I apologize for missing it. So who are the recipients of the information, and how are they structured? Is this body here? This is the listening group, or how does that work exactly with public engagement?
With public engagement, yes. The subcommittee is running. This committee is in charge of this process. Is the one making recommendations. So, we as consultants have a role here to help work through that information. That's what you see in this kind of sheet. And that's why I'm asking specifically for feedback on that. So there are some details about how that's going to work with the public engagement, but our expectation is that the raw input from the public will come to this group. You will see the raw information. We will also get it as consultants, and we will process it. We will help to summarize. We will pull out, we heard these strains over and over. This seems very significant. Or this seems to be a comment that didn't have a lot of context to it, but we want to be sure that you see it. But ultimately, it's that information is an input back to you all, so that when we go to the next step of prioritizing those criteria to see if things need to be weighted in different ways, if one criterion is very important and another one is a more minor one, you've got the input of the public on that sort of thing. So does that answer?
Just to be clear, public engagement is not us. It is true public engagement that would get feedback.
That is correct. A true public meeting, yeah. Sorry, it gets complicated because all of you are technically the public, but in practice in this group, y'all are stakeholders. More thoughts or questions? Shall I invent another topic to talk about? Okay, I think we're coming to it. Yes, Freights.
When the subcommittees are going to start to meet? Can you just briefly go over the timeline looking forward?
Yeah, so we want to move quickly. So we're hopeful that we can pull together subcommittee meetings within the next 2 weeks or so. Have those meetings, perhaps an hour for each meeting. Go through that information pretty quickly. Hopefully we'll have processed that within a week or so, and at the same time we'll be working on structuring that first public meeting with Anna Maria's help, so that we can hold that public meeting. Hopefully that's early November. And then we'll keep rolling from there. We hit the holidays, unfortunately, and that always slows everything down. Ideally, we would have public information back in time for the next committee meeting in November, that's a heavy lift, but I'd like to set that as a goal. so that we can have this kind of conversation talking about those criteria as an overall group in coordination with what we heard from the public on those. So that's kind of the initial timeline, and that, frankly, is a huge chunk of the work of this committee. After that, we'll be taking things on the design team side and generating things to go in a report. We'll be working through that information with your feedback. We'll bring things back to you to review and to comment. But as far as production of the work, that should be happening by early mid-November. All right, I think we're about there, unless there are other comments, questions, thoughts. All right, well, thank you very much for your time. We will be in contact via email to set up subcommittee meetings, and we'll go from there. Thank you.